Welcome back to my channel. With venues beginning to open back up nationwide, I wanted to remind you of the dangers that can happen at the movies. Here are two scary stories about moviegoers who had a dreadful time at the cinema.
One night I went to the theater to see a movie. There was a horror film festival about classic zombie movies. Because I had nothing to do, I decided to go and see one. I paid for my ticket and bought a bag of chips and a large soft drink at the counter. Then I made my way into the darkened theater and found a seat. The theater was almost empty. There were only a few other people watching the movie. In the row behind me there was an old man, and sitting to my right 3 seats down, there was a big fat man. The lights went out completely and the movie started. I got comfortable in my seat and began munching on my chips and sipping my drink. The movie was actually quite scary. After a few minutes, I heard a loud, irritating laugh. Looking to my right, I saw the fat man bouncing around in his seat and laughing uncontrollably. He threw his head back and heckled every horrible scene. It was so annoying. A few minutes later, the old man in the row behind us leaned forward and placed his hand on the fat man's shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "You are disturbing me with your laughter. Can you please be quiet?" The fat man scowled and turned around in a rude manner. He refused to be quiet and told the old man to mind his own business. I would have liked to stand up and tell the fat man to shut up, but I didn't have the guts. A few minutes later, I was sitting there and I was watching the movie when I noticed I didn't hear the fat man's annoying laugh anymore. I glanced over at him and saw that he was asleep. He was slumped in his chair with his head back and his mouth open. I hope he doesn't start snoring, I thought as I continued to munch on my chips and sip my drink. After a while, I happened to glance at the fat man again. He was still lying there motionless. Then I happened to notice a dark patch beneath his seat. It looked kind of like a puddle spreading out beneath him. As I was staring at him, the screen got brighter, and for a few moments I could see clearly. I gasped in horror. The fat man's neck had been sliced from ear to ear, and blood was dripping down his throat, forming a pool on the floor. All of a sudden, on the movie screen, a zombie appeared out of nowhere and attacked someone. I let out a high-pitched scream, and I almost jumped out of my seat. Just then, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a voice said, "Excuse me, sir. You are disturbing me with your screams and your constant munching. Can you please be quiet?" The movie screen is a story about a young girl who finds herself alone in the cinema, watching a very strange film that begins to look familiar. One night, I went to the local movie theater. There was a new movie out, a new horror movie to be exact. I absolutely love the horror genre. Everything from movies to stories to books and comics. I've watched and I've read everything. Slasher movies, gore, mystery thriller, you name it. This particular movie seemed a little bit different from the rest because I couldn't find any reviews on it. It was called The Untitled, and the only place it seemed to be playing was in my local movie theater. The poster looked amazing. I had to see this movie. I paid at the counter and the usher handed me the ticket. I got my usual snacks, medium-sized popcorn, extra butter, 2 small bags of M&Ms, and an extra large Coke. Carrying all the food and drinks, I made my way to section 21 and plopped myself down on the red seat. As I looked around me, I realized that there was nobody else in the theater. I was the only one there. Just me. The movie instantly started, no previews or sponsors whatsoever. I simply shrugged it off and took a handful of buttery popcorn and shoved it in my mouth. The movie screen lit up and it showed a baby girl lying in her crib. Throughout the movie it showed the girl growing up, going to school, graduating, etc., but it never showed her face. I smiled. It reminded me of my own life. The girl was now a teenager and it showed her going to the cinema. She was wearing a flannel shirt, blue skinny jeans, and black flat shoes. I couldn't believe it. I was dressed in exactly the same clothes. Again, I just let it slide, but I was a bit bored. I thought it was a horror movie, but nothing scary happened yet. The girl walked out of the theater, and suddenly she was accosted by 3 men in black masks. I almost jumped out of my seat. They grabbed her, and she was thrown into a burlap sack. The girl kicked and protested, but it was no use. The men picked her up and threw her into the trunk of their car. Within minutes, the scene changed to an old, abandoned room with torture tools lining the walls. The men tied her to a chair, then took the burlap sack off her head. The camera panned around to show the girl's face. She was screaming and crying uncontrollably. I stared at the girl for a few seconds and burst into tears, my face covered with my hands. The screen immediately faded to black, and a message appeared in bold white letters. It read, "We don't want to spoil the ending." I was now trembling and crying hysterically. I felt so weak. I couldn't get out of my seat. The girl on the movie screen was me.
Like and subscribe.